everybody, and hope everybody is safe. Uh, you know, Today's session, a brief chat that I want to talk about is about, our perspective on digital supply chain. And obviously, the context is relevant from a perspective of the fact that last 16 months, pretty much as every supply chain professional would have seen, or every business would have seen the impact of the pandemic and the disruptions that caused, and many other disruptions on supply chains. So, as we about a year and a half ago, we started doing a study, and we looked at what are some of the leading, as we call them, digital champions in the supply chain space. What have they been doing differently? And we did this comprehensive global study across 33 countries, 1,600 respondents across 7 industries, and that helped us distill the fact that what are some of the things that digital champions, as we call them, are bringing to bear in their journey on the digital supply chain. And honestly, that has helped us envision what should be the future of supply chain, and that's what we will spend some time about today. So, as I start this discussion, obviously, one of the biggest contexts in this space is to talk about the impact of what happened in the last 16 months. And many of you have seen this. Clearly, one of the biggest shifts is change in consumer behavior, the way they choose the channels through which they buy, the way they choose the products or services that they purchase, and how they are making that decision itself has resulted in substantial demand volatility. But at the same time, when you look at the supply side, there have been enough disruptions, whether it is within a geography, across global supply chains. The disruptions have resulted in all of this impacting the supply side, including suppliers' ability to kind of service the requirements. Uh, the balancing of capacities, balancing of internal capacities, supplier capacities, and the demand volatility has basically changed the whole game for the entire supply chain. But one of the things that clearly stands out is anybody who was already on the journey of investing in digital supply chains definitely benefited. And in our view, the ability to go down that journey and keep at it will really help us kind of move down and ensure that we are leveraging both benefits in terms of better revenue, in terms of reduced cost, and an overall improved performance for the supply chain. Now, let me kind of paint out what we think is the vision for a supply chain, a future of supply chain for most organizations that we kind of studied. What we call that is the connected and autonomous supply chain ecosystem. Effectively, if you look at the suppliers, and if you look at the customers, the manufacturing and the distribution channels, and all of them seamlessly, the information as well as the physical flows seamlessly flowing between all of them, but clearly enabled by a couple of elements which are coming out clearly to the fore, basis our understanding. One is the whole aspect of what we call as dynamic supply chain segmentation. Segmentation, everybody understands on a supply chain standpoint, but how that can be taken to the next level, leveraging artificial intelligence. So that's another critical capability that digital champions have been building, and I'll talk about that a bit. The second is the whole what we call as closed loop integrated planning and execution, which is about bringing not just your own manufacturing or your sales or your within your own functions, the integration, but the more important thing is to try and see how do you work with your channel partners and your suppliers, and how that is seen as one closed loop integrated planning. So that is the movement which we're seeing on that. Again, enabled through aspects of use cases of artificial intelligence. The transparency of the supply chain is something which many organizations have started investing heavily in, and to ensure that there is clear visibility of where the product is at any given point of time. And the last point is around the whole smart logistics, which is to say that how do you dynamically optimize cost to serve. So if you were to look at these four broad capabilities and ensure that they are enabled through artificial intelligence, but driven again through the needs of a completely new future-ready supply chain operating model, that in our view is the vision of the future for supply chains, which is the connected autonomous supply chain ecosystem, as one would call it. Now, let me delve a little bit more into detail on some of these aspects. When we talk about dynamic supply chain segmentation, it's primarily, if you were to envision that there is, segmentation at each transaction order level. So if you were to be able to make a decision in a supply chain at a transaction level and enable the system to decide what to do with every transaction that comes in terms of a sales order, and how do you deal with it? How do you prioritize it? Which way it should be routed? Where should be manufactured? So imagine that to happen at a transaction level, at daily, hourly levels. So that's what the element of dynamic supply chain segmentation. So how do you take segmentation at that level of detail? In closed loop integrated planning, it is about looking at two things. One, how are you baking in demand sensing, which is to say that how do you sense the demand which is coming from consumers? And now technology has evolved enough to give us tools to be able to look at parameters which help you sense demand more effectively. And the second aspect is how do you plan for capacities which are there at the supplier end? Now, when we look at both, the balancing of the two is what we call as closed loop integrated planning and execution. Again, the next big aspect is about the supply chain transparency and sustainability. Here, I would talk of two things. One, clearly, product traceability for the purpose of informing consumers that where your product is coming from, because that's a big requirement and that's an important thing that has been getting generated. The other aspect is to say that when disruptions happen, how do you look at simulation as a capability and ensure that you're looking at the end-to-end supply chain, identifying vulnerabilities, choke points, and being able to look at what can be done to respond at speed and scale through, a scenario analysis at scale. Optimization of logistics flows in a more dynamic way. So if I were to take a transaction and determine that what is the most optimal cost to serve, when I mean cost to serve, it's not just cost, but also about the service, balancing that at a transaction level. That too, our aspect is to say that how do you look at smart logistics flow from that aspect. Now, all of these four obviously cannot happen without the capabilities of artificial intelligence. They're delivering you outcomes on resilience, cost optimization, serviceability, and cash release. Now, when we look at this, let me take a few examples and articulate what some of the companies have been doing or the digital champions have been doing on this journey. A leading German automotive component manufacturer, they've kind of built out and mapped pretty much their whole supplier ecosystem to identify what is happening with every supplier on a day-to-day hourly basis. And that gets converted into a control tower for them to take decisions as to saying that if a supplier is down on capacity, if logistics flows down on some issue, how do you kind of respond and make a change? And that being autonomously being done by the system itself, with an overview being provided by the people to say that, yeah, are the decisions being taken most appropriate or not? But the system is well enabled to take that decision and decide how much to make, when to make, and how to prioritize what needs to be done in the production planning. Another example is about the consumer electronics player who was building out transparency through an effective supply chain, which is more to do with saying that how much do you kind of provide visibility in the supply chain so that you are being able to provide that to your end customer. Similar examples of a pharma player mapping out what their end consumers' end impact is. How do you do that demand sensing? And on the industrial products player, clearly an example to show that how do you crash in a make-to-order environment and provide visibility to end customers about the kind of lead times that they have and ensure that their services are subsequently enhanced. So their ability to bring down service lead time from 4 days to 4 hours was primarily driven through this whole dynamic supply chain segmentation and providing the visibility in the make-to-order environment. So given these examples, one would wonder that are there any benefits, in doing the digital supply chain investment? So clearly, our study shows that very clearly the investments done by digital champions substantially higher than most of the players, resulting in benefits for them in terms of their OTIF levels being consistently higher than most other players very regularly. The other aspect is inventory turns almost double of what average players would be ending up having. All of this resulting in benefits in terms of improved revenue, which is again substantially higher, and reduced costs, which is much higher than most of the other players. So clearly, the order of the day and the fact that benefits can be delivered in a digital supply chain kind of initiative is clearly there. But one piece of input is that before you embark on the journey, definitely build a business case before you, and what needs to change to kind of drive the supply chain. Now, in summary, what are we saying? Basically, that the vision for the connected and autonomous supply chain ecosystem delivers benefits through the elements of supply chain transparency, sustainability, closed loop integrated planning, smart logistics flow, and dynamic supply chain segmentation, all enabled through artificial intelligence. And the most important thing is to enable all of this. You need to have the future ready organization, which is enabled through centers of excellence, partner collaboration models, and digital upskilling of your people. Hence, in summary, digital champions are on the journey to build out connected and autonomous supply chain ecosystem. So that's the journey for the future. Thank you, friends.
I believe that's a journey a lot of people are definitely looking forward to, Ajay. Thank you so much for joining in and for setting the vision for 2025 with regard to digital champions. Thank you once again for that wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, on that wonderful note, it's also time for all of us to march ahead. I do hope you've all been taking down notes just the way I'm doing with my notebook. There are so many points that our speakers are sharing, something for all of us to reflect, to look back, and to also take note. With that, let's quickly also move forward towards our next session, because we're talking about collaborative supply chain networks, how it is a key link in order to build a new league of entrepreneurship. And I think this is one topic that we can always be so affirmative about, but let's try gathering insights about it from our next speaker, Charles Devlin DeCosta, National Operations Head, Gati KWE. In fact, he's responsible for network development and optimization, structural improvement and hub design standards, franchise policy, and much more. And he is a logistics industry veteran with over 25 years of experience. So let's gather that experience and the expertise from Charles Devlin DeCosta in a session that's starting in just a couple of seconds.